picture this. You're sitting in a hospital exam room.
Right.
You're wearing one of those drafty paper gowns, maybe shivering a little bit, and, well, you're just waiting.
We've all been there.
Yeah, exactly. And then the door opens. Your doctor walks in, looks over your chart, asks you a few very specific questions, and then, boom, gives you a diagnosis.
Just like that.
Right. And in that moment, you trust their medical judgment. I mean, you are quite literally trusting them with your life.
Yeah, it's a massive amount of trust.
It is. But have you ever stopped to wonder where that judgment actually comes from?
Most people don't know.
Like how it was actually built inside their head. And more importantly, and this is what we're getting into today, what happens if the very technology designed to help them is like quietly preventing them from developing that judgment in the first place?
Yeah, it is a really profound question because we almost universally just take the origin of that expertise for granted.
Oh, totally. We just assume they know.
Right. Most of us assume medical training is essentially this giant data upload. Like, we picture medical students memorizing textbooks, flipping through flashcards, passing board exams, until their brain is just this biological search engine of diseases and treatments.
A walking encyclopedia.
Exactly. But the reality of how a doctor learns to actually think and make decisions in the real world is vastly more intricate than just memorizing facts.
Which brings us right into the focus of today's deep dive. We're exploring the core arguments from this really fascinating piece of research. It's titled The Automation Gap: Erosion of Medical Judgment and Apprenticeship.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And our mission today is to investigate what is essentially a hidden crisis in modern healthcare. We're looking at how artificial intelligence isn't necessarily replacing doctors, but rather it's hollowing out the hidden pathways they use to learn their craft.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because when you hear the phrase AI in healthcare, I feel like it is so easy to jump straight to the sci-fi panic of, robotic arms taking over the surgery suite.
Right, the Terminator doctor.
Exactly.
And that is the distraction we really need to bypass entirely here. We're not discussing some dystopian future where a machine performs a heart bypass completely on its own.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
What we're looking at is a very real, very current, systemic shift in how human expertise is formed in hospitals right now, today.
So it's already happening.
Oh, absolutely. The source material outlines this really subtle but dangerous reality. The immediate risk isn't that machines will replace doctors tomorrow. The risk is that these systems are fundamentally altering the cognitive development of the next generation of physicians, the ones who are training today.
Wow. Okay, so before we can really look at how automation might be breaking medical training, we have to establish how clinical judgment is forged in the first place, right?
Yes, the baseline.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that it isn't just about memorizing facts.
Not at all.
Because the research points out that while medical training is publicly defined by all these rigid milestones, the competencies, licensing exams, board certifications, the actual magic happens beneath all that formal structure.
Under the surface.
Yeah. The formation of judgment is actually an apprenticeship of exposure.
That's a great way to put it. Clinical judgment simply cannot be acquired in a vacuum. You cannot read a textbook on Tuesday and possess clinical judgment on Wednesday.
Right, it doesn't work like that.
Exactly. The process detailed in the article is incredibly slow. It's deliberate. It requires a resident or a young doctor to be exposed to, raw uncertainty.
Messy situation.
Very messy. They have to encounter ambiguous cases, make provisional decisions about what to do next, receive immediate feedback on those decisions based on how the patient actually responds.
Oh, wow.
And they have to do all of this under the watchful eye of an attending physician. It's a whole process.
It honestly sounds like learning to navigate a complex, sprawling city.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah. Like, if you just memorize a map to pass a geography test, you hit a milestone, right? You can point to Main Street on a piece of paper.
Sure.
But actual navigational judgment, that's driving those streets every single day. It's hitting unexpected dead ends, getting stuck in traffic, learning the hidden shortcuts.
Figuring out which roads flood when it rains.
Exactly. You cannot just download that spatial intuition into your brain. You have to drive the miles.
You really do. And what's fascinating here is how the article highlights that medicine has historically always relied on this kind of cognitive apprenticeship.
Okay.
The goal of a residency program isn't just to transfer factual knowledge from an older doctor to a younger one. I mean, a modern database can do that in a fraction of a second, right?
Right. I have WebMD on my phone.
Exactly. The goal is specifically to cultivate what the authors call discernment. And this relies entirely on repeated exposure to early-stage, often messy decision-making.
Discernment.
Yeah. When you go to a doctor, you aren't paying for their ability to regurgitate medical trivia. You are relying entirely on their hard-won discernment.
So they have to get their hands dirty with those entry-level decisions to build the mental models they need for the hard stuff.
Precisely.
And the warning here is pretty stark. If you remove that early exposure, the judgment doesn't just evaporate overnight. I mean, the veteran doctors in the hospital right now, they still have it.
Because they learned the old way.
Right. But for the newer doctors, the residents just entering the wards, that intuition simply stops developing.
It never formed.
Which leads us to this massive causal shift. Because clinical judgment fundamentally requires getting your hands dirty with entry-level uncertain decisions, what happens when a machine steps in to do all that dirty work?
Well, that is the core of the automation gap. AI systems are currently being disproportionately deployed at the very front end of clinical work.
The entry-level stuff.
Exactly. We are talking about tasks like symptom assessment, risk stratification, generating diagnostic suggestions, triaging patients, and handling documentation.
Let's pause and define some of those terms for a second, because that sounds like a lot of hospital jargon.
Fair enough.
So risk stratification, for instance, is essentially a doctor looking at a crowded ER and figuring out who is safe to send home and who is, like, secretly on the verge of crashing, right?
Spot on, yes.
Okay. And a differential diagnosis is basically the doctor's mental shortlist of the top 5 diseases that might be causing your specific chest pain.
That is a perfect way to translate it. And hospital administrators, they love to frame these specific tasks as low-level or routine.
Right, just busy work.
Exactly. The logic you hear in the boardroom is, hey, let the AI handle the boring triage stuff, let the algorithm generate the initial shortlist of diseases, and we'll save the doctor's brainpower for the complex decisions.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the research argues that framing these tasks as routine is actually a massive blind spot.
A huge one.
Figuring out what question to ask a patient next, or building that mental shortlist from a chaotic pile of vague symptoms, these aren't just administrative chores.
No, they're the foundation.
Right. These are the exact foundational moments where novices cut their teeth. This is the weightlifting required to build a diagnostic brain.
Yes, the weightlifting. The ability to sense when a patient just doesn't quite fit the textbook template is a skill forged exclusively in those initial moments of triage.
We're still messy.
Exactly. This is where a young doctor learns when ambiguity matters more than speed. If an automated system absorbs all these preliminary layers of work, the medical trainees are suddenly inheriting conclusions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're handed a polished short list of diagnoses without ever participating in the chaotic reasoning process that produced them.
So they're just being handed the final answer at the back of the math book.
Basically, yes.
They don't have to figure out the why. And the article notes that this creates a fundamental shift in the young doctor's role, right? Like moving them from doing to merely reviewing.
Yeah, and this shift changes their entire cognitive posture. In a highly automated hospital environment, instead of actively constructing a medical decision from scratch, the clinician is just asked to review a system-generated output.
So they're just checking the math.
Right. Imagine a tired resident at 3 in the morning. They're looking at a screen where the AI has already flagged the patient for sepsis and recommended a specific antibiotic.
Okay.
The resident is simply asked to confirm the recommendation, to click accept, and to only escalate things when something feels obviously wrong.
But wait, how would that young resident know if something feels obviously wrong if they never developed the intuition for it in the first place?
That is the million-dollar question.
Like if they never spent years manually hunting for the subtle signs of sepsis, how do they know when the AI's algorithm is, hallucinating or missing a crucial piece of context?
They don't. They really don't. And the research makes a powerful distinction here. Reviewing is not the same as reasoning.
Wow. Reviewing is not the same as reasoning.
Exactly. Validation is not the same as judgment. When your primary job becomes validating a machine's output, you become highly skilled at monitoring a software system. You do not become skilled at interrogating real-world, complex human biology.
You're just a really good IT monitor.
Exactly. By having the answer handed to you, you lose the chance to learn from your own near misses, from misclassifying a symptom, and from grappling with raw uncertainty.
So if this erosion of foundational skill is happening right under our noses in hospitals everywhere, Why aren't administrators panicking?
Money and metrics.
Right. Like, why isn't the medical community sounding a massive alarm and pulling the plug on these systems?
Because the short-term metrics look incredibly appealing. The automation gap is virtually invisible on a quarterly spreadsheet.
Of
These AI systems, they drastically reduce cognitive workload. They increase consistency across different departments.
Yeah.
They improve average performance metrics and patient throughput.
They make the hospital faster.
Exactly. From the perspective of hospital operations, this looks like pure, unadulterated progress.
It's the illusion of efficiency masking a long-term systemic fragility.
Well said.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. The article addresses what it calls the false promise of automation, right?
Yeah, the false promise.
Which is this really popular idea that AI frees up doctors to be more human. I mean, as a patient, I want a doctor who looks me in the eye, holds my hand, and shows some empathy.
Sure, we all do.
So if an AI is handling the paperwork, the triage, and the routine diagnostic shortlist, doesn't that free the doctor up to actually focus on bedside manner? Isn't freeing them up a fundamentally good thing?
I mean, the marketing behind that idea is incredibly persuasive,
Mm-hmm.
but the research argues that in practice, it completely falls apart.
Really? Why?
Because you cannot skip the cognitive apprenticeship and still expect clinical mastery. The authors drop an incredibly hard-hitting line here. They say, empathy without judgment is not care.
Oh, wow. Empathy without judgment is not care.
And furthermore, complex decisions without grounding are not wisdom.
That's powerful.
It is. You can have all the bedside manner in the world, but if you misdiagnose a rare autoimmune disease because you relied entirely on a generic AI summary, well, your empathy is useless to the patient.
You can't just outsource the foundation of a building and expect the penthouse to float in midair.
Exactly.
You're expecting these clinicians to make highly complex life or death judgments later in the patient's care without having fully developed the foundational skills to understand how the patient even got to that point.
Right. And to illustrate the danger of this, the authors introduce a really compelling comparison to the aviation industry.
Okay, airplanes.
Yeah. In aviation, commercial pilots fly planes that are heavily automated. The autopilot handles the vast majority of routine flying.
Right, they just sit there most of the time.
Well, sort of. But the aviation industry is acutely aware that skills degrade if you don't use them. So pilots train extensively in sophisticated flight simulators.
Oh, right, to practice the emergencies.
Exactly. They spend hundreds of hours practicing for rare failure modes, engine blowouts, severe weather emergencies, precisely to counteract the skill atrophy caused by automation.
But healthcare hasn't adopted anything like that.
Nope.
And you can't easily build a simulator for a human body because every single patient who walks into the ER is biologically unique. I mean, a Boeing 737 is identical to every other 737, but my heart disease will present totally differently than your heart disease.
Precisely. Healthcare has introduced the automation without introducing the compensatory structures. As AI absorbs more of the daily cognitive labor, clinicians risk losing their diagnostic fluency.
That's scary.
It is. The true danger emerges, as the text notes, when novel cases arise or when systems fail at the edges. AI is trained on historical data and averages, right?
Yeah.
So it struggles immensely with bizarre, unprecedented edge cases.
Which creates a terrifying scenario. You have a doctor who is totally out of practice at forming a complex diagnosis from scratch because they've spent 3 years just clicking approve on an AI dashboard.
Exactly.
And suddenly they're faced with a bizarre, novel medical crisis that the AI doesn't recognize. The system fails, the screen offers no help, and the doctor is entirely responsible for solving the puzzle.
And the accountability remains entirely human.
Wow.
This is what the source identifies as a dangerous asymmetry. Clinicians remain legally, ethically, and morally responsible for the outcomes of patient care, even as their actual decision-making latitude narrows.
So they have less control but the same blame.
Exactly. The system recommendations begin to dominate the workflow. Their opportunities to practice independent reasoning decline, but they are still the ones standing in front of the medical board or a jury if a patient dies.
So what does this all mean? It honestly sounds like being put in the driver's seat of a fully autonomous self-driving car where the manufacturer has completely removed the steering wheel. You're just watching the dashboard. But if the car suddenly veers off the road and crashes into a wall, the police still show up and write you the ticket.
That's exactly what it is.
You have almost no control over the foundational data, but you absorb 100% of the liability. I mean, how on earth does a young doctor cope with that kind of psychological friction?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see the inevitable fallout in hospital culture.
Which is what?
The authors list exactly what this asymmetry produces. It creates intense moral distress, professional burnout, an erosion of trust between clinicians and hospital leadership, and most dangerously, a defensive reliance on systems.
Defensive reliance.
Yeah, imagine the internal monologue of a third-year resident. The AI recommends discharging a patient. The resident's gut tells them something is subtly wrong. Maybe the patient's skin looks a bit too pale, something the machine can't
Worry
see.
a subtle human cue.
Exactly. But if the resident overrides the machine, keeps the patient overnight, uses expensive hospital resources, and turns out to be wrong, they face a massive reprimand.
But if they just agree with the machine and the patient has a bad outcome, the hospital's legal team can argue they were just following standard AI protocols.
Bingo. So the path of least resistance, the safest path for the doctor's career, is just to blindly agree with the AI.
Wow. Defensive reliance, that's bleak.
It is. If you don't trust your own judgment because it has systematically atrophied, you defer to the machine. Skill atrophy is a systemic risk, not an individual failing.
It's not the doctor's fault.
No, the article explicitly points out that this is not a critique of lazy clinicians. It is the predictable, unavoidable outcome of current system design. Judgment that is not exercised does not deepen. Imagine being the patient whose complex care depends on a doctor experiencing that exact moral distress. Someone who has quietly lost confidence in their own ability to override a glowing screen.
It is a deeply unsettling reality. So how do we fix this? Because automation is absolutely here to stay, right?
Oh yeah, it's not going anywhere.
We can't just unplug the servers and go back to paper charts. The AI is incredibly useful for processing vast amounts of medical data.
It is.
So the final arguments in our source material focus on redesigning apprenticeship for the cognitive age. If we can't remove the machines, we have to actively engineer ways to preserve human judgment before it's too late.
And the path forward requires highly intentional choices from healthcare leadership. The overarching argument is that cognitive apprenticeship must be deliberately redesigned, not implicitly sacrificed on the altar of hospital efficiency.
And the research outlines some very specific, really fascinating strategies for this.
Yeah, Didi.
Like they suggest preserving certain decision tasks strictly for human trainees, meaning the AI is literally locked out of certain preliminary evaluations, so the resident is forced to do the mental math.
Yes.
They also propose creating what they call slow lanes.
I love this concept.
Me too. This is where a hospital artificially injects friction into the workflow. For example, before the AI is allowed to show the resident its diagnostic shortlist, the resident must type their own independent differential diagnosis into the system.
Making reflection mandatory.
Exactly.
And it is deeply counterintuitive to a medical culture that is currently obsessed with speed and optimization.
Oh, I bet administrators hate it.
They probably do. You're essentially asking administrators to deliberately slow down patient processing in specific areas to protect the cognitive development of the staff. But the authors frame this not just as an educational concern for medical schools, but as a fundamental governance and safety issue.
It's so ironic. To move fast and use advanced AI safely across a massive hospital network, we actually have to artificially build in these slow lanes to force humans to struggle and learn.
Right.
We have to purposefully recreate the exact friction that the AI was built to remove.
And this raises an important question for everyone listening, and certainly for the institutions managing our care.
What's that?
Governance has to address not just what AI systems are doing today, but what kind of professionals they are shaping for tomorrow. A system that cannot replenish human judgment is, by definition, unsafe by design.
Unsafe by design. Wow.
Yeah. The research warns that ignoring this fact is a form of risk outsourcing. You're just kicking the can down the road, hoping the next generation of doctors somehow magically acquires the intuition they were never allowed to practice.
Because the decisions hospital administrators are making about software right now are literally decisions about human capability a decade from now.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the ultimate crossroads of this deep dive. As clinicians transition from being hands-on decision makers to essentially becoming system supervisors, the very definition of clinical expertise is shifting under our feet.
It really is.
Healthcare institutions have to make a choice. They must decide whether they want to be a human practice that is supported by advanced technology or a technological practice that is merely supervised by humans.
Those are two fundamentally different worlds to be a patient in.
Very different.
They are completely different paradigms of care. And yet it leaves us with a critical, lingering thought to consider.
Okay, what is it?
We talked earlier about the danger of novel cases, those unexpected moments when systems fail at the extreme edges of what they know.
Right, the edge cases.
Right. If the next generation of doctors only ever learns to validate the medical patterns that an artificial intelligence already recognizes, what happens when a completely new, unprecedented disease emerges tomorrow?
Oh, man.
If human diagnostic judgment has fundamentally atrophied because the heavy lifting was outsourced to a server, who is left to notice the anomaly that the machine was never programmed to see?
That is the exact question we all need to be asking. Who is left to notice what the machine cannot see? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden cognitive mechanics of medicine. We hope it gives you a whole new perspective and maybe a few profound questions to ask the next time you find yourself sitting in a drafty hospital gown just waiting for an answer.